Hi, I'm Michael Fry, President and CEO of Deepwater Subsea. On this episode of The Daily Grind, we're going to talk about training. And not only are we going to talk about training both for the guys offshore, but we're going to talk about why the OEMs today are not qualified to be able to set the standards for what guys need for the future. We're also going to talk about competency and why just someone being competent doesn't qualify them to actually get out and run the race. So let's get into the show. So I'd like to start off with training first and foremost. And the reason I want to start off with training is because it's already in the CFR today. If I go to CFR 30-250-442J, it talks about people having to have a comprehensive knowledge of BOP hardware and control systems. It's already in the regulations. If I go to SEMS, I go to 250, 1900, 250, 1500. I go into these different areas in the CFR, and I find that it talks about training and qualification and competency of people. The thing that I find interesting is today with the big push for the new release of the well control ruling, everybody's getting all worked up about these little bits and pieces. Now, yes, there are things, and you've heard me talk about this before, they're going to be game changers to the industry, and they might actually cause a shutdown for a while some of the mechanical stuff gets taken care of. But when we talk about kind of the softer side of the well control rule with the training competency and the QA QC, something to think about is a lot of the stuff's already there. It's just not being enforced. We talk about training. The new proposed rule talks about people having to be trained in the maintenance, inspection, repair of BOP equipment to the specification of the OEM or to the standards of the OEM. What I find interesting is the OEM today currently doesn't have the standard to deliver to the industry. This is what I think a subsea person should be trained in. The sad thing about it is the drilling contractors do. The drilling contractors can tell you this is what we think a senior subsea needs to know. The IADC has the KSAs. This is what a guy should be able to do his job. But unfortunately during Macondo, during one of the hearings, one of the attorneys asked a gentleman from Transocean, are you certified? Are you qualified? And unfortunately the answer was no. The answer is no, because there is no certification program or a qualification program in the maintenance, inspection, and repair of the BOP. So for me, what I find interesting is in today's world of training and personal development, if you look at the job the guy actually does, there are no courses that cover the whole spectrum, that 6 to 6 that I like to talk about. This isn't the aviation industry, this isn't the military, where when I joined the U.S. Navy, I went to 16 weeks of torpedoman school down in Orlando, Florida. 16 weeks before I even went to my submarine. Now, how do we train people for their job and do it before they get to the job? That, I think, is a bigger challenge for the industry. The other thing that I think is going to be very challenging is today's world, a lot of guys are parts changers. And the reason they're parts changers is because the cost of the downtime for the lost revenue versus just taking a part off. And what I mean by that is if I take off a bonnet and I go to rebuild it, it could take 24 hours. If I take a bonnet off and just put on a new one, it could take 6 hours. That 18-hour savings ends up to be a lot of money at the end of the year. Now I take that component off and I just send it to the beach and have the OEM work on it, or I take it off and work on it offline out of the critical path. Unfortunately, a lot of times those guys now have turned into parts changers. So when we talk about the training, we talk about competency, we talk about all these things, what is the job of a senior person really like nowadays? We need to focus on that before we look for the OEMs to give us the specifications of what somebody needs to have when it comes to the repair, remanufacturing, or not remanufacturing, but the repair, the inspection, the maintenance of components that they don't even work on out in the field. All that work is done by the drilling contractors. So I think it'll be interesting with this new proposal. The thing to keep in mind, 250-442J already talks about you need to have comprehensive knowledge of the control systems and the BOP. It's there today. It'll be there tomorrow. The question is, how do we address it when it happens? One other thing just real quick, when we talk about, the OEMs and training and stuff, a lot of the newer training courses that are out there are all focused on the new equipment. What happens, I'll just use for an example, Cameron's got a TL BOP, they got an EVO BOP. What if my BOP is a T or a U or a U2? I just have older equipment. Are these training courses going to be all encompassing? Are they going to be a kind of a craftsman course versus an OEM specific course? I can take apart a valve and actuator and see that there's a piston and there's seals and what direction they go and how to inspect them. I don't need to have a full annular or full control system to be able to do this work. We talk about basic craftsmanship, and that's the type of stuff that really needs to be done versus having all-encompassing courses that focuses on the actual equipment itself. Let's train the technician before we train on the equipment. That's the biggest part that I see a deficiency in today's industry on, is guys don't know how to do critical dimensions, non-destructive testing, just basic visual inspections for the equipment that they're working on. And then what happens is they put the things back together. They don't have the correct craftsmanship and how to torque a flange. So what do? They just run the impact wrench all the way around. They go, hey, it's good. No, you're torquing in a star pattern. I mean, that's basic craftsmanship. Unfortunately, a lot of guys in the industry today have not been taught that. And because of that, we have these issues offshore with components being put together wrong and premature failures just due to poor craftsmanship. And I think until that issue gets addressed, this problem that we're having with training and competency is going to go on for a long time. So certification and licensing, I talked about that during the Macondo hearings, one of the lawyers that asked a Transocean employee, are you certified, are you qualified, have you ever been trained to do all this work? What I think is interesting is we talk about competency and people say, well, having a license, oh, you got a driver's license. Yeah, you go, prove yourself, you take a test, you go through all of this stuff. Having a driver's license doesn't qualify you to go drive for NASCAR, and it doesn't qualify you to do Formula One. All it says is you know how to drive a car. So just because we certify or we license somebody doesn't change the end result, which is poor craftsmanship. Qualification, proving someone's knowledge, that to me is where it's really at, and just the re-verification that he's doing the work that he's supposed to do as part of a QA/QC process. So the thing for me is, so many people talk about qualification, competency, and we talk about qualification all the time, but qualification in a much broader scope. But just because someone's competent doesn't mean they're qualified. Yes, you took a test, you went through a course, you got a driver's license. Doesn't mean you can go drive on the Autobahn. Doesn't mean you can go drive NASCAR. The other thing when I want to talk about qualification is, I find it awfully interesting is people say, well, competency is, qualified. If you're qualified, it's just, what do you need to get into the job? Now, for me, coming from the military, qualification was a program. You had to prove yourself through various steps that you were qualified to do that job. 9 months, you've heard me talk about the submarine qualification program. This wasn't just you showed up, answered a bunch of questions, and they say, hey, congratulations, you're now submarine qualified. It was 9 months. It was a full qualification program. The other thing that I think is important, when we talk about qualification and training and all these other things, for you who are NASCAR fans and Formula One drivers, why do we have qualification rounds before we have the actual race? The qualification is to prove that you actually belong on the track. There's a lot of racers every week who don't qualify for the race. Same thing with golf. You have so many rounds that qualify for the finals. If you don't get to that qualification, you don't make the cut, you don't continue. So just because somebody's gone to a course and they have a certificate doesn't mean that they're qualified or even capable of doing the job that they're supposed to do. And again, I go back to the training. Until that part of the industry changes, we're going to constantly have these issues as we move forward.